Good afternoon to you. 506 Now News Talk, 105.9 FM WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up from the Heritage Foundation, John Veneble will be with us at 5:30 ahead of Joe Biden's address to the nation tonight from the Oval Office, where he's going to call for more funding for a bunch of countries that aren't Israel by exploiting the tragedy, the attack in Israel. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. More for, in order to find out more about what's going on in the country right now, including and especially in Congress, let's bring in Congressman Matt Rosendale. He's from Montana's 2nd Congressional District, and he's on the phone. Hello, sir. Good to have you back with us. Matt Rosendale. You there, sir? Uh-oh.
Vince, it's great to be on with you.
Oh, there he is. Hello, Congressman. You've got a busy day today. What are the things like behind closed doors? Everybody getting along?
Not busy enough. I would like to be back in my committees doing my work. There's no reason that we can't conduct those affairs. Mm-hmm. And, we had a long conference, as you know now. It was like 3 hours long. Lots of discussions. Look, every time we have a conference, Vince, you can be assured of several things. Number one, prayer and the pledge. Okay, that's a nice way to start off.
That's nice, yeah.
Number two, there will be a sports analogy. Number three, there's going to be a wartime analogy. Number four, there'll be a couple of Bible verses quoted. Mm-hmm. And then number five, that's when the cussing begins. So you have to get all the other stuff out of the way, and then you get down to it.
Oh, you must have done a lot of these. There's a full-blown formula for them now. Okay, so during the during the cussing portion. Yeah, Congressman, during the cussing portion of this, what was said? What are the key divisions right now that are keeping us from having a Speaker of the House?
Honestly, I believe it's tempers. I believe it truly is that, and I think, which is what I've been saying for 10 days now, that tempers are hot, tensions are high. People are saying a lot of things that I know that they will regret saying, and so I don't take any of it to heart that any of my colleagues are saying about one another. It's like they sort of just have to get it out of their system. It's like a bad cold. They have to work it out. But once these things are worked through, I still am confident that Jim Jordan is going to be the next speaker. So, I think he's going about this in an honorable manner. He's trying to earn support from people and help them work through their differences instead of trying to use the D.C. cartel apparatus outside of the conference to basically strong-arm and intimidate people into doing things. Now, there's people, look, don't get me wrong, there's people that have had pressure imposed upon them from outside of the conference, outside of the members of Congress, but that's because of their communities that they live in. That's their constituency. And if their constituents are calling them up and saying, what the heck are you doing? How come you haven't voted for Jim? There's not a lot Jim Jordan can do about that.
Is the Capitol Hill switchboard pretty busy this week? Are a lot of Americans calling in saying, put Jim Jordan in as Speaker?
I think it depends on what office you're in, okay? My folks back in Montana know that I'm a Jim Jordan supporter, have been. I've been working with Jim for not just the 3 years or nearly 3 years that I've been here in Congress, but I was working with him before that. And Jim is an incredible legislator. He has done a great job chairing the Judiciary Committee in the way that he's been able to formulate the way that he has conducted the investigations and the people that he has had conducting the questioning, the manner with which they have done it to extract information, and then to take all of that information and disseminate it in the evening news to the American public in a way that they can understand what the heck happened, because a lot of that stuff is pretty complex, and he does an extraordinary job of articulating it, and has been the speaker, the spokesperson for the Republicans for quite some time.
Yeah, the ability to articulate seems like an important role for a Speaker of the House. Here's what I think is really happening, though, with you, Congressman. You tell me if I'm wrong about this. I should point out you're a part of one of the 8 Republicans who decided that Kevin McCarthy hadn't fulfilled his promises and needed to be removed as Speaker of the House. And since then, there's been a lot of attacks on you and your 7 fellow Republican lawmakers who made that decision. But what I think's happening here is that the 22 or 20 holdouts, whatever the number is on any given day, the thing they're most angry about is not Jim Jordan potentially becoming Speaker. It's that Matt Gaetz and Matt Rosendale and the 8 Republicans are going to get credit from the American people for getting us a more conservative Speaker. Is that what's really going on here?
I will tell you that I think there's a lot of validity to that statement, and that's why I've been trying to stay out of the discussion when we go into the conference, because I want folks to be able to vote for their next speaker without the taint, if you will, of my participation.
So this is my impression with Matt Gaetz too, that he's kind of keeping his head down on this process. He doesn't want to be a lightning rod anymore. You guys just want Jim Jordan to become Speaker, and you want cooler heads to prevail.
That's exactly right, and so we're trying not to damage anybody, if you will. You know, that's why when he ran against Steve Scalise, I honestly voted for Jim, but I didn't come up and make any big supporting statements, because I did not want to poison his chances of going. And when Steve Scalise originally was able to get more votes than Jim in the conference, I came out of conference and said, look, if Steve Scalise is going to the floor, I will support him on the floor. But Steve withdrew because he was short quite a lot of votes, 30, 40 votes. He wasn't able to get flipped over. And so Jim has already come a lot farther than that, and I'm just trying to keep from poisoning the well, because I don't want someone's disdain, or opposition to me to influence their support for Jim.
But here's the thing that drives all of us crazy, is that you're all adults. You're adults. You're members of Congress. You've been granted a great power by the American people to conduct the nation's business. And I've got a bunch of quotes in front of me reported today by Henry Rogers at the Daily Caller. Andy Biggs, your colleague, Congressman Andy Biggs, does believe that this is related to these holdouts are saying they don't want to be perceived as, quote, rewarding Matt Gaetz. Nancy Mace said that the members who oppose Jim Jordan are doing it, quote, purely to spite Matt Gaetz, and on here. And this, to me, it strikes me as the most petty nonsense imaginable in the midst of a country that desperately needs solid leadership at the helm.
And I'll tell you something, Vince, this is exactly why I have talked about term limits, not just since my time here in Congress, but during my time in the state legislature and going all the way back to 1980. I've been on the record supporting term limits. But now that I served in the state legislature and here in Congress, I am even more so convinced, because the same relationships that people talk about that help pass legislation, number one, sometimes they help pass bad legislation because people have relationships. Number two, I have literally seen people vote against good legislation, vote against it because of who the sponsor was. Okay, that's what you call a spite vote, and it's immature. It's not productive, but it happens, and that's why I've been a big supporter of term limits, so that we can do away with that stuff. I try to take. I'm a human. I'm not perfect, okay? But I try to take every single vote and cast my vote according to my convictions, and allow the politics to play out, and try, my very, very, very best not to allow personalities or persons to influence that decision whatsoever. But not everybody is quite as good about that.
Congressman, tonight I want to move to another issue, and this is one of the many important reasons for why there should be leadership in the House of Representatives right now. There's going to be an Oval Office address. Joe Biden is going to address the nation, they say at 8 o'clock, and then he's going to advance this idea that we need to pass Some reports say upwards of $100 billion in funding, most of which is supposed to go to Ukraine. But he'll be using Israel as the basis by which to make that argument tonight. What do you think of this move by people like Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell to use the terror attack in Israel as a basis for pushing more funding to countries that are not Israel?
It is shameful. It is absolutely shameful. We have seen Joe Biden try to use every tactic possible to get more funding to Ukraine. They have already received well over $100 billion. I have been on the record as opposing sending this additional funding to Ukraine. I introduced legislation during the last Congress and reintroduced that legislation that says, you know something, until we have operational control of our southern border, that definition is in statute. Until we complete the security system that needs to be built on our southern border, until we can protect our people right here in the United States from the 100,000 deaths a year from drug overdoses, most of which are coming from fentanyl, then we shall not send additional funds to Ukraine. Over $100 billion. The only thing that we can have a true account, and it's not even an accurate accounting, but a fairly accurate accounting, is the $30 billion worth of weapons. We don't have an accurate accounting of anything thereafter. And for Joe Biden, he's been trying to get more funding sent to Ukraine. He's used the disaster down in Florida. He tried coupling it with the disaster in Hawaii, and now this shameful tactic of taking a terrorist act of genocide against Israel and attaching that to try and get additional funding to Ukraine is completely wrong. I will tell you, the House of Representatives already passed the Department of Defense appropriations bill. We passed the state and foreign operations appropriation bills. Combine those two pieces of legislation, which are over in the Senate, that Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer haven't been able to get, together and get passed, combined a total of $3.8 billion of aid for Israel. And you know something? I've actually talked to some people that have been over in Israel that are Israelis. They have said, we really aren't looking for a lot of additional support, but just don't talk bad, okay? Don't say that they don't need help. Don't recognize Hamas and this terrorist activity is not being accurate, true, and a terrible act.
Yes. Yeah, and also the whole point of the United States supporting Israel with funding and weaponry for years has been to prepare for moments like this. That's obviously true. Speaking of that, don't basically believe lies about Israel is what you said you're hearing. What do you make of the fact that you have a colleague called Rashida Tlaib who was standing out there yesterday inciting people to raid the Cannon House office building's rotunda by lying to them about this idea that Israel had struck a hospital, killing hundreds? She just told that lie. She started crying in front of the crowd, and that crowd would later go into the Congress buildings before they were subsequently arrested. Congressman, what do you make of that behavior?
Well, I will tell you this, that the people that were arrested inside of the Cannon office building in the rotunda should be charged the same as the people that came in on January 6th into the Capitol of 2021, where they were charged with disrupting a legislative process, and should be brought before the same judges and prosecutors and treated the exact same way. This is outlandish, and for a member to participate and incite that is really bad. I mean, we still have a member from New York that pulled a fire alarm 2 weeks ago to stop the legislative work that was being done. Nothing has come of that yet. People in this country are tired of seeing this double standard. Jim Jordan, again, go back to that, has been doing an incredible job exposing the corruption and the double standard that the FBI and the Department of Justice has imposed upon their very people in our country that they are supposed to be defending. And I think that he is best suited to be the speaker so that we can do something about this as we go forward.
Congressman Matt Rosendale from Montana's 2nd Congressional District. Sir, thank you as always for your time. Really appreciate that. Let's check in on the phones. We've got Joel calling in from Lovettsville, line 2. Joel, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Oh, my gosh, Vince, just, Mr. Research here. So I called Ken Buck's office because he wasn't voting for Jim Jordan.
Right.
And the office specifically said, and, he wants to get a more conservative BS. He said, the person said, quote, he has to admit that the 2020 election was legitimate. And I said to her, excuse me, who's the president of the United States? Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that make the election legitimate? And she says, he needs to admit that the 2020 election is legitimate. And I said, well, once again, who's the president? And then I said the 5 things that you talked about that were irregularities, okay? Certainly, we talk about the laptop. We talk about the FBI interference and so forth.
Yeah.
And you know what she did? She said, this conversation's over, and hung up right before I got to say, well, Buck you. I mean, I'm telling you. Just unbelievable. So don't believe that it's because they want to get a feather in their cap for a more conservative type Speaker of the House. The 2020 election legitimate, and that's the reason they're not voting.
That's Ken Buck specifically who you're talking about, and Buck's been making this case. Buck's been making this case in public a lot. He's not saying the 2020 election was legitimate. Let me tell you something. I am looking at a column right now from the Washington Post dated January 5th, 2021, the day before the events of January 6th. The headline, my Republican colleague's ploy threatens the future of the Electoral College. The author, Ken Buck, he wrote this piece. There's a sentence. It's featured in the second paragraph of the piece. Guess what it says? I share the concerns of many voters across the country about irregularities in the presidential election. That was Ken Buck in 2021. Election denier extraordinaire. Well, good afternoon to you. 534 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yeah, Ken Buck. Ken Buck did write an op-ed January 5th, 2021, saying that he's concerned about all of the irregularities in the presidential election. But the rest of the op-ed's like, but who cares about the irregularities? Just rubber stamp it and move on. You're not supposed to be objecting. And now he's making that his litmus test, whether you're as dumb as he is. You've got to agree. What is the world coming to, You ever ask about that? Check in with your friends and family. What's happening to our planet? All right. Tonight, Joe Biden set to address the nation, 8 o'clock. From the Oval Office. This is the second time the White House has attempted this particular stunt. And this evening, we are told, he is going to be making an ask for what is reportedly $100 billion for Israel, nominally, but more importantly, in the White House's eyes, for Ukraine and maybe Taiwan. There's a lot going on here. Let's bring in John Veneble. He's a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and he joins us now. Hello, John.
Vince, great to be with you.
All right, so how much sense does this make that we would take all of these various crises and lump them into one giant slush fund rather than assess them each on their individual merits?
That's the omnibus way of doing business with this administration. They try to force everything they can through with choice little bits that everyone agrees to. Funding for Israel should go through, and so in order to get all of the other controversial packages through, they lump them together to say, if you don't love Israel, then you don't love it, right?
Yes.
And so you're going to disapprove this package, which means you don't like Israel. And that in no way is what Congress is trying to do. They're trying to be fiscally responsible, and that's what this president is trying to avoid.
It's exploitation. And this is a pattern here for not just the government, but in particular for the Biden administration these days, where they'll exploit. Congressman Matt Rosendale was just on minutes ago with us, and he reminded me that the Biden administration has now twice in recent months attempted to exploit natural disasters and disaster relief in order to lump in Ukraine funding. Natural disasters here in the United States to lump in Ukraine funding. Why would you exploit an American natural disaster to do that? Why wouldn't you take an independent vote on Ukraine funding?
No, that's a great question. Go back to Nancy Pelosi's tactics on pushing bills through Congress. You've got to pass it in order to read it, right? This whole thing is comical, except it's putting us more deeply into debt, one. And two, it's not allowing us to put funding where it's desperately needed. Border, it's got to go there. Our friends in Israel, it's got to go there. And the controversy surrounding Ukraine, I think most in Congress would actually pass a bill for funding as long as it had a couple of strings attached to it. And one of the primary ones is that transparency piece. And you've got to allow Congress to do this for us. It's their job. They're the ones that hold the purse strings, and they need to be able to go in and say yes and no to these big funding issues.
Yeah, and also, how about start demonstrating some of the urgency about our own country that you demonstrate about others? That is not to in any way downplay the crises that are playing out elsewhere, but I do not see the same urgency coming out of Congress, either house for that matter, when it comes to fentanyl deaths, the border, the economy collapsing, none of it. But they'll put Ukrainian flags on their lapels and sing on the Capitol steps about how much they love Ukraine. They'll do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and you'll get Janet Yellen saying, yeah, of course we can fund two wars in other countries. Of course we can, but there's not a word about that fentanyl crisis. There's not a word about actually building a wall that will prevent our country from being invaded, with everything from folks that are on the terrorist watch list to folks who are packaging things like fentanyl that kills how many thousands of Americans a year? It's crazy, the numbers.
What is this? Traditionally we think of an Oval Office address of being something super critical in the national interest, that it's a jarring moment, that Americans are all going to have to tune in for this to see what the President of the United States has to say. It feels like the Biden administration is working to really diminish these and to turn them into something that is just another routine statement from the White House.
I don't know if that's their intent, but that's certainly what they're doing. They're making a mockery out of the office addresses. The White House, every time they get up, it should be something powerful, as opposed to stumbling through a script that someone else wrote, and the ideas that are flowing through that are something that our current president, couldn't articulate on his own.
Yeah.
This is exactly what you say. It's something, it's almost a comedy. And if it wasn't our reputation on the line, it would be, but it's horrible to watch.
Also,
and it's something I'm not looking forward to tonight.
Me neither. And also, if we had a media that was worth its salt, it would include things in its coverage like Joe Biden's family's made a tremendous amount of money from Ukraine. And here he is now exploiting a crisis in Israel to further give money to that country.
Yeah, that's just a little bit too far, don't you think, to have that transparency, the scrutiny that's going on right now in the back of halls like Fox News and your station, where we're actually bringing things that are on a laptop that belongs to the president's son, that all point in his direction. But the vast majority of Americans are one news source only. If it's not in the Times, by God, it's not worth my time. And the Times and the Washington Post are doing their best to mask these big issues, to keep the American public from knowing.
So what about the guys on the other side of the aisle here? Senators Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell are all for this. I think they're going to be, doing watch parties tonight for this Biden speech, because they are enthusiastically supporting this idea that you would link up a ton of countries in one gigantic spending package, again, to exploit the suffering we just saw take place in Israel.
Yeah, I don't understand it either, Vince. This is one where you look at the package of general officer approvals that, quote unquote, Tommy Tuberville is holding up. He's not holding up anything. The Senate could go through and line by line approve these general officers and get through the whole of them while they're not doing anything else, but they're using this stand to show how weak they're trying to convey anyway. The conservatives are with regard to defense.
Well,
it's a shell game.
Of course, and Tommy Tuberville has actually offered the Biden administration a way out here. He said he'd be back on board with unanimous consent if they just stopped killing babies with defense money. And they're not doing it. They'd rather keep the abortion machine alive than provide the much needed ambassador to Israel.
On top of everything else, Vince, it's against the law to do that. If they want to go and continue to fund the leave and the travel expenses of folks to have abortions, they need to change the law to do that. And they're not willing to do that. They're not willing to put their names on the line to do that.
So on that issue, and you may not be equipped to answer it, maybe you are, but it seems to me that if they're breaking the law here, which to me it seems it's been obvious that they're doing that, is there a way to hold these guys accountable? Like, can we at least get this through the court process? Like, really confront them over the fact that they're breaking the law and taking, I'm pretty certain my grandparents who are still alive and still paying taxes have no interest in, I know for a fact, not just pretty certain, I know for a fact, they don't want to be funding this abortion regime. It is completely illegal what's happening, and yet they're being forced to do that.
I think that the Department of Justice is just chomping at the bit to go and actually take this on. It's their job. Ugh. And I'm sure they're chomping at the bit to actually go and hold their president accountable on this. I cannot, if you look at the word integrity in a sense of wholeness, there is no facet of this administration that has integrity except to shore up whatever the agenda is behind the green door of the White House. Otherwise, tell me how they justify the border situation. Tell me how they're justifying a crazy runaway budget right now. $2 trillion a year we're going into debt? You've got to be kidding me.
Well,
this is in the extremes.
Each passing day, it's another insult. It's like we're talking to John Veneble with the Heritage Foundation. Today we got confirmation from the White House that they accidentally disclosed the identities of a number of special operators yesterday when they posted a photo to Instagram of Biden meeting with American Special Operations Forces in Israel. And that's incompetent. I didn't mention it before. I should mention it now. The person who's in charge of the press office is that moron, Karine Jean-Pierre. Karine. So whoever's deciding to post these photos in that office apparently didn't know that that's the kind of thing you shouldn't do. So the office not run all that well. Additionally, Sir John, we've got this $100 million that Biden just announced earlier this week that he's going to be sending into Gaza and the West Bank, for that matter. But he says he wants to provide more American money and resources into Gaza. But the record there shows that Hamas steals all that stuff. Everything that arrives in terms of humanitarian aid gets stolen by Hamas. Why were we giving more resources to Hamas at this very moment?
Vince, this parasite of Hamas is infested. It's in the organs, behind the skin, in the tissue of the Palestinians. Everything we give them, including pipe for water, metal pipes, they will cut that up into sections. They will fill it with explosives and propellant, and they will make missiles out of the pipes that we give them to help the Palestinian people. If we don't give them the pipes, they'll actually go in and dig up the infrastructure to do that. You can actually find video of them bragging about it online. There is nothing that we give, nothing that the world gives to the Palestinian people that does not go directly to fund the fight that Hamas is carrying out against the Israelis. And we need to stop that. That's $100 million that's going to hurt people, our friends, and we need to stop that.
Yeah, and it's the same thing is true with gas. The gas that we put into the region, Hamas steals it. So now they can't run their desalination plants in order to provide clean drinking water to the residents of Gaza because Hamas stole the fuel in order to charge its war machine up. The same is true of the cement that has been sent in as humanitarian aid. 90% of it, instead of going to humanitarian infrastructure, it goes to building the bunkers and the terrorist infrastructure of Hamas. It happens over and over.
There is nothing that Hamas has done for the Palestinian people except bring them harm. They're hiding behind them, and the reason why that you're seeing the Israelis do incredible precision strikes using very new technology on bunker busting. It's going in the front of buildings, and you're watching one bomb collapse an entire building. How does that happen? It's because they build an infrastructure of tunnels and storage facilities underneath these buildings, and the Israelis know where they are. So this idea that we can somehow get money to the Palestinians because their plight is so dire, we can get money to them. It's all going to Hamas, and all Hamas does is hurt the West and hurt the Palestinians in the process.
John, finally, is it jarring to you, as it is to me, to see so many people here in the United States rooting on terrorism? It's to the point that they've turned the paragliders who flew across the border into Israel to slaughter hundreds at a concert into some sort of rallying symbol that's being displayed here in the United States.
It is baffling, but people have a sense of crazy that you can't get them out of. I think the vast majority of Democrats started out with a very noble cause, and over time that has slipped into a way of being as a party that the individuals would never recognize if they were able to rise up and actually look at what the Democratic Party is standing for these days. And this idea of promoting Hamas, the idea that they are the good actors and the Israelis are the bad. There wasn't an Israeli that slipped across the wall into Gaza and beheaded babies or slaughtered innocents in villages. There wasn't anybody who did that. And for someone in the United States to see that and say, boy, those Israelis are bad, they're the same ones that think that Marxism or communism will somehow bring wealth and equality to the United States, and they are so far off the mark. I don't know how to get them back.
Yeah, it's all connected. It's all part of the same kind of twisted ideology about what's good and what's bad.
It really is, and I if you go back to the movie The Bridge Over the River Kwai, they started out with a premise that said we're going to make the prisoners better and healthier, and the next thing you know, they're building a bridge that's helping the enemy of their nation states defeat their nation states. This slippery slope of ideology, you've always got to question what you're given. Whether you're a conservative or a liberal, you've always got to question what you're being fed and make your own decision. And when you do that, you're never going to get duped into a situation where you're backing something that you would never do in a rational, reasonable sense.
That's the same advice I always give to parents who wonder how they can break their young lefties out of the spell. I said, just tell them to be as skeptical of institutions as they think they are right now. Just apply that skepticism to everything, and it'll be much better. John Veneble, thank you very much from the Heritage Foundation. Really appreciate your time today, sir. You know, it's amazing. Not that amazing, not that surprising. But Cori Bush, the Congresswoman, is now crazy Democrat. She's saying that we can't call yesterday's insurrection at the Capitol by a bunch of anti-Israel zealots who literally defaced the building. They spray painted it, Free Palestine, on and on. They refused to leave. They were chanting in the rotunda of the Cannon building. The cops had to come and slowly arrest everybody. They were whipped into a frenzy by lies by Rashida Tlaib. They actually interrupted Senate proceedings yesterday. That is, they blocked they basically blocked Congress from being able to do its job for a time yesterday. Remember January 6th, everybody was charged and arrested and locked up and solitary confinement, on and on. Congresswoman Cori Bush says, quote, "What we're not going to do is call yesterday's courageous and nonviolent anti-war pro-peace demonstrations an insurrection," she says. "This was good trouble, civil disobedience. And let's be clear," she says, "January 6th was not civil disobedience. It was an insurrection." She's just a hair-on-fire hypocrite is what she is. She's like, hey, these two similar events, it's only fine when we do it. Okay. At least we know the rules. It's not hypocrisy. It's hierarchy. Amazing. Let us see here. I've got Phil in Fredericksburg calling in line one. Phil, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Look, I'm just begging Congress to not run through this $100 billion aid package because we know it's crooked, and I guarantee you $20 billion of this probably going straight to Iran to kill more Jews. Please look at what they're doing with this money. Please don't rubber stamp this $100 billion, and don't believe a word this crooked president's saying to you about it. Don't approve it. See what's going on, and let's see what's happening with this money.
Man, I hope somebody listens to you, Phil. Thank you. It's really important that President Biden, little slip, just revealing what's really going on. Biden is set to give this Oval Office address tonight, and apparently the ask is $100 billion for all these various countries, to include countries that have enriched his family. This is, again, this would be one of the top paragraphs in real news copy in a real country, but we don't have one of those anymore. Let us see here. We've also got Mike in Gainesville calling in. He's been waiting patiently. Line 4. Mike, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, time is short. Let me get this out. Jim Jordan should tell Ken Buck he will admit that President Biden is the irregular president of irregularities.
Yes. Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, we should do that. I mean, because everything is kind of crazy, isn't it, right now? And the way out is to have a loyal, competent opposition. The competence, we're still looking for that. We'll bring you reports if we find it. The great one, Mark Levin, is going to have a lot to say about this. I can assure you. He so often does. He's up next here on the legendary WMAL.